you. And Carol Vorderman wants to help you find a fortune, be it prize money, inheritance, or a valuable family heirloom.
On this programme, we never say never.
ITV live tonight at 8. Find a fortune.
This week's The Answer Lies in the Soil visits a garden at a Buddhist centre. That's Thursday at 7:30. Now, useful tips and cuttings from Gardener's Diary.
You've just come back from your holidays and your garden isn't looking as wonderful as it did when you went away. Don't despair, because the gardening experts are full of bright ideas for bringing your garden right back to its full form again. This week, John Ravenscroft takes a look at some new varieties of begonias. Jeff Hodge says if you gave your indoor plants a holiday outside, it's time to bring them back indoors now. And Reg Moore says, don't feed them bits of bacon, take care of your insectivorous plants. But let's start with Nigel Snow, who's taking a look at the season ahead with some winter hanging baskets.
Now, you know, a lot of people think that hanging baskets are just for summer, but something like a pansy basket mixed in with evergreens and with some bulbs will actually give you colour right through the autumn into the winter, and even actually come better in the spring. And it's a good thing to do. But what you need to do is to start making your baskets now. The days are getting shorter, the pansies are beginning to come into their own and be freely available, and so now's the time to actually start. So it does mean that you need more than one set of hanging baskets if you want to do them all, but certainly the odd one is worth looking at. Now, I've got some pansies here. This is a wonderful way to grow them, and a great way to buy them because the plants are quite big and the colours are mixed, and I think that's important. Pansies have a lot of different colours and they're not all as good a grower as each other. Some are strong, some are weak, so choosing a mixture will mean that you get a lot more chances for your basket to come good. Now, I've started to build this basket over here, and as well as putting pansies in, I wanted to put something else, and I've started to use these small ivies. Now, these you could grow yourself from cuttings, or they're quite easy to buy, very freely available. And using this type of liner, you can actually get the plants right down into the slots there, and then once you've got the ivy in, then it can be topped off with a pansy, and that way the whole basket is sort of filled up. But once you've done the sides, start to think about the top, and using a good compost, we can then start to put in plants up here, which will not just give us colour, but things like ivy will trail over the edge. Now, we can also put other things into the basket, and I like to put crocus in. Strange looking things they are. There you are. This is how you buy them. And crocus put in the sides will come out and flower upwards. And crocus in the top, of course, will just flower upwards anyway in the spring. And this is fine if you can see your basket from other angles, not just from the bottom, because otherwise, of course, you'll never actually see them. And we can just place those out on the top to decide where we're going to put them. Now, the pansies are very, very greedy. They need feeding right the way through the season. And when we were building summer hanging baskets, we used these. These are pellets of slow release fertilizer. And this is exactly what the pansy needs. Get the basket established now, and then put some of these in, and you'll find that what will happen is that the pansies will stay growing right the way through. So we'll push these into the tops as well. I think 4 or 5 would go in there. By the time we've built the whole basket up, it's surprising how it is going to look. It's going to fill up, and it's going to certainly come around to looking something like this one. This is one, as I say, that I did earlier, and you can see that it actually does build into quite a good feature. By the time the plants have moved around, I can smell the scent now of the pansies. You know, it's the yellow ones that tend to have the strongest scent. And the ivies will run down and run through it, and the whole thing will become as one, and the crocus will flower as well. It'll be wonderful.
Well, this week they've indulged me again and allowed me to talk about one of my favourite groups of plants, the carnivorous plants. I find them very interesting because of the way that they've modified themselves from the way that plants normally grow in order to cope with the conditions that they're in and the sort of food that's available to them. First of all, let's have a look at the Venus flytraps I've got in the front there in the tray. Now, these are the ones that most people try and have a go at growing, and usually they fail because they don't give them the right sort of conditions. Now, these come from the Americas, and they grow in very boggy places, as do most of the carnivorous plants, really. And because the soil's very boggy and there's no fertiliser in it, they have to produce, another way of collecting food rather than through their root system. And they've decided to do it by catching insects, because there's lots of insects hanging around in these sort of swampy regions. Now, the best way to grow a Venus flytrap at home is to put it outside in a sunny place during the summer, standing in a saucer of rainwater, and keep this rainwater topped up so that they're in wet conditions all the time. And they catch insects by the little traps on the end of the modified leaves there. And when they're in the sun, those traps go really red, which lures the insect in, and it lands in the middle of the trap, triggers the hairs inside, which close the trap on the fly, and then it's digested over the next few days. Whatever you do, don't feed them with bits of meat or anything like that, bits of bacon, because there's so much protein in that, it just rots away the trap, and that's the end of it. And of course, you never stimulate the traps to close with a pen or anything like that, because that just weakens them. Another interesting one here is the pitcher plant, or Sarracenia. And again, these are easier to grow, I think, than the Venus flytraps. Put them outside in the summer, but some of them are hardy outdoors, but not these particular ones that we can see here. They need to come inside in the winter. And I like to grow them in a little group with other carnivorous plants in a tray, which again is placed in a saucer of gravel. Now, these work by the leaves are modified once again into a sort of tube with a hood on the top. And the insects are lured up to the top of the tube near the hood, because that's where there's lots of nectaries producing nectar to attract them, and they sip at the nectar, get a bit tipsy, fall down inside the slippery tube and get digested in the bottom. But back to the plant I was holding first, which is this monkey pitcher here. This is a baby one. Here I've got an actual leaf from a mature one, where you can see how the leaf comes over, and on the end the leaf again is modified into this little pitcher, which also catches insects with digestive juices in the bottom, similarly to the way that the pitcher plant works. But this monkey pitcher, they're a good thing to grow in a conservatory in a shady place, and I like to put them in groups. And I'm just going to pot some into this hanging pot here. And compost, all I've got here is some ordinary multi-purpose compost, to which I've added half sand, and that's all they need really. Straight compost and sand, peaty sandy mixture, or if you don't like peat, use a peat-free compost. Put a bit of compost in the bottom. Take your plants, and in here I'm going to try and pop 2 into here. And as you can see, they don't have a huge root system, these. And here's another one, which I can sneak in down the side of the first one. Now, you might think it would benefit from a third, but I think really, in the end, they're going to grow nicely and fill that up, and they'll do a decent job there. And as they grow, they'll produce these little pitchers on the end, and just to finish it off, I'll attach the hanger to it, and that will be good, and give us another piece of interest in our conservatory. There we are. That will help to keep us a bit insect-free during the summer.
It's my guess that this is one of those times of years when people rush out and buy new garden tools. We go away on our holidays, we come back, and the garden doesn't look as wonderful as it did when we went away. We need new tools for weeding. We're desperate to plant new plants and herbs ready for the autumn season. I've got a couple of new tools that I think you might be interested in. The first is this soil scoop here, and it's a variation on a trowel, really. I've been using it today, and I really like it very much indeed. It does all the work that a trowel will do. It scoops soil very, very effectively because it's more like a spoon, really, in shape. And it really gets down. This serrated edge helps you to get a much better purchase on the compost and the soil that you're working in. And this very pointed edge, is much more pointed than a trowel, would be very useful if you were furrowing your way through soil. The thing I like about it particularly is there's a very smooth transition between the metal of the business end of the tool and the wooden handle, so that your hand isn't going to rub against it unpleasantly and make blisters in the way that tools so frequently do. It's retailing currently at around £16, and I think that's something that I'd probably like to add to my tool set. From the same range comes this angled weeder, which is a new variation on an old theme. You can use the weeder like this, using this V shape here, to take hold of a weed and with an angle pull it all the way up. You can use it in between paving slabs to get hold of those really tricky weeds, and this serrated edge will help you take the lot up. So if you want to get busy in the garden over the next few weeks, I think these two at around £16 each are great.
Home-based price track means unbeatable prices guaranteed.
Brilliant.
And hundreds of offers like up to 25% off all Crown Pure Brilliant White paint.
Lovely.
At DFS this bank holiday time, there's something different for everyone.
Delighted from Sheffield.
Who wouldn't be? This orange sofa, real leather, only $4.99.
Dazzled from Southampton.
The sofa's good looks caught my eye, and this price is good looking too.
Delirious from Slough. Of course I am. In trendy spice colour, this sofa cost me less than £400.
And on everything there's 4 years free credit and nothing to pay for 12 months. You'll definitely feel special this bank holiday time at DFS.
Bernie's dreaming of a tasty pedigree jumbo. He's dreaming the meaty middle will never end. He's dreaming of that lovely chewy coating. He's dreaming he's eaten his way through the whole lot. Didn't he have the same dream yesterday?
Well, welcome back, and it's a big welcome back to these houseplants. If you were watching the programme at the beginning of the summer, you will have hopefully seen that I suggested that you take some of these houseplants outside for a nice summer break. Well, now that summer is nearly over and the temperature is dropping a bit, it is time to start bringing them back inside. But don't just bring them inside on their own, you've got to do a little bit of work on them to make sure that they are happy and healthy for the rest of the autumn and winter. The azalea here, well, it looks like it's already started to produce some flower buds for this winter, so that's a good sign. As it's a flowering houseplant, don't repot it, otherwise you might prevent it from flowering. But if the compost looks a bit old and jaded and there's just no life in it, it might be worth just giving it a little top dressing. And that way it'll give a little bit of nutrients, but of course you are still going to have to feed it through the autumn to ensure that you get plenty of flowers. And of course, because this is an azalea, just tap the pot there to settle the compost, you will have to use an ericaceous compost, because obviously they don't like lime. So that one's more or less ready to come back into the house. Let's have a look at the orchid that we put outside, and hopefully you can see there that it's produced some lovely fresh growth, and with a bit of luck these should produce some nice flowers during the winter and early spring, and that'll be there and there, so we should get at least 2 flower spikes on this one. Again, it's flowering, okay, it's bursting its pot, but don't repot it, otherwise you will prevent it from flowering. That's that one. We also put out an amaryllis, or a hippeastrum, and that's looking okay. Now I'm going to do something that you shouldn't do now. You should wait until perhaps October, because the leaves do look a little bit tatty, and I was speaking to the lady who holds the national collection of hippeastrums, and what she suggests that you do when the leaves are looking a bit tatty in the autumn and the plant isn't growing much, this is what you do to it. You take all those leaves off about there, Now obviously you will be stopping feeding, the leaves will have gone yellow, you'll have stopped watering, and the plant will be beginning to go dormant. But you chop those leaves off, and again, perhaps just give a bit of a tidy up, like so. Again, don't repot and don't cover the bulb, otherwise that again will prevent flowering. We also put out some foliage houseplants, like this lovely yucca here. One of the things you have to do to these is to mess about with the leaves and make sure they're nice and clean. Now you can buy proprietary wipes like this, or you can buy aerosols, but to be quite honest, your best bet is just to give it a good spray with tepid water. Don't use cold water, you might give it a bit of a shock. Get a sponge out and simply start sponging the mess off the leaves. And that's basically how I like to clean my leaves, and I do this right throughout the winter months when the plant's indoors, because obviously light levels will be low and you want plenty of light to get there, and that dust can prevent it. So go all over the plant, but the other thing you've got to look at with certainly all these plants, but specifically something like this, is the roots, because it's been outside all the time. You could get slugs, snails, all sorts of stuff getting into the compost. So just check, and there's none there. Oh, there's a little slug, so we'll have him out. You don't want him doing damage. I'll just put that in the rubbish pot. Don't want him doing any damage. Worms are the other thing, but of course possibly the worst thing for houseplants is vine weevil. And this was one plant I put out for the summer, and sadly, as you can see, it's got lots of lovely foliage, it looks great. Where have all the roots gone? And I hope that you can see that. It's got the flipping damned vine weevil right in its roots there. So we should have used the new compost for that, and that would have got rid of those nasty things. So this obviously should not go into the house. The whole plant should be destroyed. The compost and everything that's around the roots should be thrown away, otherwise you've got a vine weevil problem. Otherwise your houseplants will be lovely this autumn and winter.
Well, that's the last thing we need in our begonias now, but it was necessary until the weather broke. Begonias love it cool, love it moist, and in our case slightly shady. So the further north you go, and certainly eastern Scotland, the better they get. What they don't like is hot, dry, windy conditions. The begonia I'm standing by, I think, and I hope someone could maybe correct me if I'm wrong, has been in cultivation about 200 years. And that's begonia flamboyant. You do it from a tuber, you split it just like a potato. Once you've got it for life. It grows on windowsills, it grows in shady borders, you give it to each other, and in the winter, just keep it frost-proof in a box of dryish peat, and off you go again. Because we had an awful lot to do this spring, it was the end of June when these got planted. And so from the end of June till now, in the hot weather, they sat a bit, and now they're lovely. So that's the very oldest of all the ones we have. And then, to supplant that type, the multiflora type, Ernst Benari raised the non-stops. And here is a fair sample of non-stops. We put them in big tubs like this at the end of June, and some of the more floppy varieties benefit by being pushed together like this. And I suppose you could say, if I'd put one colour per tub, then some of you would think that was more appealing. But the same applies. They love it shady, cool, and moist. And if people make a mistake with these, it's watering them in full sun. So there's a bit of a discipline to growing decent begonias. But luckily for me, luckily for all of us, a new race of begonias now is coming on the market under the trade name Solania. Now, these are just some examples of them, and the colour range as yet is quite limited. But the flowers are quite a respectable size. The beauty of these for me is I've watered them in full sun on an open terrace and not had the slightest bit of flower scorch or leaf scorch. In our case, we first grow them from little cuttings in early May, and only about 2 weeks ago were they put into these final pots to be on show. In our case, I think these will go well on right through October until the first serious frosts of late autumn. Now, these are not tuberous, so here, if you want to perpetuate them, then a little cutting with no flowers in would work, but we think that probably it's best to start from new young material each year. I haven't as yet seen these being offered in the young plants, which are so ubiquitous in the spring, but maybe it's only a matter of time. But this particular type, Solania, and others I'm sure will be bred to extend its range, will cure us of that difficulty that I've experienced, and maybe you have too, where given hot, sunny conditions, begonias scorch. And so, as I've always loved begonias, I'm encouraged by the appearance of these. If any of you know of a begonia which has been in cultivation longer than flamboyant, and we also have two other colours that date from the same era, the pale yellow Helen Harms, maybe we can see that just behind me here. Yes, there it is. I've only got a rather poor stock of it at the moment, but Helen Harms, Beauty of Ghent, Flamboyant, they were the ones which were around before Ernst Bernari's non-stops rather took over. So here's the next development, and who knows what's in store for us. And those of you who, like me, love growing begonias can only be encouraged.
The better background.
Who's going on your knee? Well, in the first bags this week, we've a real cri de coeur from Helen Johnson in Exeter. What on earth, she says, has happened to the shoots on my Gleditula? What has happened?
Well, if I put it there so the camera can pick it out,
yeah,
you'll see that what's happened is they've swelled up what should be just
nice
leaves,
little, yep,
young shoots. They've swelled up and they form these sort of, look like grains of wheat.
They do, don't they?
But inside the grain, if you break them open, there's 2 or 3 little larvae.
Ooh.
And they're sort of brood chambers for a wasp or
yeah,
a fly. And it happens on limes as well during the summer months. You get these nail galls, and they're caused in a very similar way. They're bright red.
Right.
And I think that's what it is.
Dear, oh dear. Ooh, well, I don't want to get too close to them. What can she do about them?
Well, I would be very reluctant to spray, because really she's got them this time probably because of the hot weather, because they bred faster and there were more of them, and
yeah,
they got further afield. And I think next year, if we don't get the weather, then we probably won't get the galls. But the way to deal with it really is, if you can afford to, if it hasn't taken the whole tree over, is just to cut them off.
Pick them off. All right, well, okay.
Destroy them.
Organic methods, pick them off and all will be well. Pauline Williams has written to us from Belfast with a rather different question. I like this one. She says, I have a frost-free, shady porch. What can I grow in there?
Right, well, years ago we used to have an orangery that was very shady. That was frost-free,
yeah,
and this is what we used to grow in it.
It's beautiful.
And a butylon.
I love
Pink-belled butylon. Grows about 6 foot high, flowers right the way through most of the year. Quite a large shrub.
Yep.
But modern plant breeding has now produced
Gracious.
this hybrid of butylon, called the Bell series, the Bella.
Wonderful.
Beautiful.
It looks papery, doesn't it?
It does. They're magnificent. This is a lot shorter, a lot stockier, a lot more flowers, and bigger flowers as well, in fact, which will still tolerate shade conditions and really just wants to be frost-free.
Yeah.
Any reasonable compost, and they're quite stately plants really. They've got this big heart-shaped leaf.
Yeah.
So it really is a good plant for these conditions.
What sort of flowering season does it have?
Well, a very long flowering season will go right the way through most of the year with the flower always there.
Well,
It has
then
a sort
get
of
one.
it has a break somewhere during the season,
yeah,
but that's about all. And it grows in most composts, and really just wants a nice big container to show off its best.
Yeah. And I imagine that people passing it would just so admire it, to get lots of tender loving care and lovely comments, and it would just bloom forever and ever. A butylon.
That's it. That's it.
I think it's exactly what you want. And if you'd like to know anything more about beautiful butylons or anything else we've talked about in this week's programme, you can of course get our fact sheet, which this week is number 344, and you can get it by sending, please, a stamped self-addressed envelope to Gardener's Diary, Bridgemere Garden World near Nantwich, Cheshire, CW5 7QB. Don't forget the phone lines, 01270 520 455. Well, it's a bit gloomy and a bit grey here.
It is.
But, of course, that's pretty good weather for gardening because you don't get too hot. So I expect Nigel's got a job for me. We'll see you at the same time next week. Till then, bye-bye.
Goodbye.